Hello, my name is Caleb Smith with the Rocket Miner newspaper, here to provide your news update for May 31st, 2020. Starting with coronavirus figures, and let's kind of do reverse order than what we often do. Worldwide, Johns Hopkins University is reporting that there are 6,152,160 total cases. When it comes to global deaths, that number sits at 371,700 people. When it comes to recoveries, that number is at 2,637,496 people. In the United States, total American cases now sits at 1,761,503, which is 23,553 new cases compared to yesterday. When it comes to total deaths, that number sits at 103,700 people, which is 915 new deaths compared to yesterday. In Wyoming, we're up to 693 lab-confirmed cases, which with an additional 210 probable cases. And we've had 17 COVID-19 related deaths. Now I need to backtrack because I forgot to also mention that we have 658 people who've had the coronavirus and have recovered as well. In Sweetwater County, we are up to 22 lab-confirmed cases and 8 probable cases. County health officials sent out a press release today detailing cases 19, 20, 21, and 22 in Sweetwater County, which right now all of them are isolating at home. And Sweetwater County Public Health is doing its usual contact tracing that occurs, trying to figure out who they've been in contact with and whatnot. Going through the cases, case number 19 is a Rock Springs woman in her 50s. She is reported to be in good condition. 20th case is a Rock Springs man in his 40s, who is also in good condition. The 21st case is a Rock Springs man in his 50s, who is in good condition. And the 22nd case is a Rock Springs man in his 70s, who is reported to be in stable condition. To stop community spread, and you know this, but just to repeat it, because especially when we see an increase like this in cases, it's a good reminder to go over what we should be doing to limit the chance of us catching it and passing it on to somebody else. Please stay at least 6 feet away from people you're not housed with. If possible, send only one person out to do chores like getting groceries. Stay at home as much as possible. Don't touch your T-zone, eyes, no mouth. Cover your mouth. And this is something that's in bold in the press release, wear a face covering. Elsewhere in America today, we're continuing to see a lot of protests and unrest. On Monday, George Floyd died in police custody after a police officer pressed a knee on his neck for several minutes until he stopped breathing. What has followed? This level of unrest and frustration, we've seen displayed before, but it's been rare to see it at these levels. There have been protests in dozens of cities, often but not always followed by pushback, violence, and even some additional deaths. The Associated Press is reporting demonstrations have taken place in cities including Los Angeles, Seattle, Nashville, Oklahoma City, Salt Lake City, Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, New York City, Washington, D.C., Las Vegas, St. Louis, Memphis, Little Rock, Philadelphia, Miami, Las Vegas, Cleveland, or I said Las Vegas twice, sorry, Cleveland, Denver, Des Moines, Dallas, Houston, Indianapolis, Charlotte, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Portland, Phoenix, Tampa, Honolulu, Anchorage, Juneau, St. Paul, and even Cheyenne. There are more places than that. I'm primarily sticking to the larger, more recognizable cities. In places where it's some of the most extreme, curfews have been put in place with more than 40 cities, in addition to the National Guard being mobilized in some areas. As a person who writes, who aims to tell stories, who covers the news, I find it interesting how you frame things. Just running down a couple recent headlines, you can see protest over police killings rage in dozens of U.S. cities. Fox News. Protesters erupt in violence after George Floyd's killing. That's from ABC. Police erupt in violence nationwide. That's from The Slate. Scenes of urban warfare erupt from Miami to Seattle. That's the website, The Daily Beast. Protests continue in U.S. as police turn more aggressive. That's from The Washington Post. Just going back to basic English and sentence structure. What nouns you choose, the verbs you use, and how you put them, where you're putting your focus, your emphasis. I always find that telling about the story that will follow. A headline often sets a scene. I'm not going to personally tell you how I feel on this. I have some very strong opinions on the topic. I've spent most of my weekend even just trying to put together what words I'm going to say here. And I recognize that to communicate my opinions poorly is to potentially do damage to the causes that I champion. So I want to do something just a little bit different. I would like to offer, just tell you just a little bit about my background, share a couple observations that I have, and in the end invite you to join me in a thought experiment. I did most of my public schooling just outside St. Louis. The county I grew up in, the northeast corner was very ritzy. It's actually the population in that spot was a gated community. Not just anybody could get in. And I grew up in the more rural portion, farther down. So even though I'm a bit of a ways removed from when I was still living in Missouri, I picked up a few lessons from the riots that occurred in Ferguson back in 2014 when Michael Brown was fatally shot by police officer Darren Wilson. Now I'm not going to talk about that case. Frankly, if it even comes up in conversation, unless you've spent the time to go through the voluminous dozens of interviews released by the grand jury, I'm not interested in engaging you on that topic. If you haven't done your research, that's something I don't get into. I'm more interested in what I learned about what followed and what happened when people protested and the powers that be responded. One of the more surrealistic moments of my life has been watching familiar places, many from my childhood, torn apart by unrest. Places that I've been with on family trips or field trips, and I mean, you don't send a busload of fourth graders to a place on the fringe. Some of these places were established locales with rich local tradition and good people behind them. You don't expect to see these types of landmarks paired with images of police and riot gear, or footage of these places obscured by the haze of tear gas, or the aftermath where they've been left broken and wrecked. So, having spent quite a bit of time focused on that previously, and having had talks with people who lived through that there, and I know some people who are currently in cities right now who are facing this protest, and having talked to them, I want to share a few observations that I remembered from that time that I believe are still relevant today. As a general rule of thumb, locals don't burn down local stores. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but even in the heat of the moment, most people recognize that the short-term, medium-term, long-term damage that does to the community in addition to themselves. How are you supposed to get groceries in the morning? How are you supposed to be able to look some people in the eye if you later cross them and they're like, I know what you did. You've been a part of this community for years, and you do that to somebody that you've that your grandparents grew up with, that your parents are friends with. I found one or two stories where locals were involved in this stuff, and they were dressed down by another local who shamed them into helping put things back together and defend against others. More often, and this leads me to my next point, I think it's chaos attracts instigators and opportunists. Now, information's incomplete. There's a lot of unsubstantiated reports, but just even some of the details that I've seen don't pass the smell test for me. And a lot of this is unconfirmed, and I'm labeling it as such. I'm not saying this is gospel, but I've seen video of bricks being left where they could be used by angry people. Reports of people bursting into shops and ignoring repeated pleas to stay nonviolent. Don't be doing acts that can be considered confrontational. I think a certain percentage of this ruckus is was at least started by trolls. They're not just limited to chat rooms. Some people find it very easy to put on a mask, slip in and do a lot of stuff very quickly. Anecdotally, back in Missouri, people I trust went on at length at the number of people that they believed were from outside the community who stirred things up and then left those whose hometown it was to deal with the consequences. Now, I can't prove this. I've been looking. Fox News had a story about initial review of Minneapolis booking data, which shows a majority of the arrests during the protests have been locals. I'm sure most of you didn't spend your weekend looking for analysis of Minnesotan crime statistics. This is part of what I do. And yeah, a majority of the people booked are locals. But what I'd like to note, and this story didn't do so, is that if you're a troll who's aiming to make people look bad, you're going to be quick to parachute in, break some stuff, maybe set some fires, and get out before police even arrive, leaving others to shoulder the blame and deal with the ones who are responding. So I would say that, and even the fact that there are so many outsiders that are still being arrested show that they are represented. They are a unmentionable part of the breakdown. The story I read said was about 80 local, 20 outsiders. Now this is just a theory. Treat it as you will. A third observation that, and I'll admit this is a little bit prediction, but expect more details to come out. And as they do, I would encourage you to not believe everything you hear, at least not automatically. Crazy things are happening everywhere. No matter your thoughts on how the arrest initially played out, you can't deny that subsequent choices and parties have escalated tensions and reactions. I'm boggled by the number of high-profile cases we've already seen, such as a CNN news crew being arrested live on air. When you have that type of stuff going on, I don't doubt that more is coming and will be revealed. I believe that there are those with fewer resources and viewers may have some very noteworthy tales that have yet to break through. I must also stress, at the same time, that as you're shifting through the breaking news, apply some critical thinking. When you can, look for confirmation, outside, independent. If there are big claims, there should be big proof backing it up. It's tempting to believe something because it matches your worldview. This, I think, is kind of how humans are wired. But demand more of yourself and your news sources. Don't accept something without considering where it came from if it can be independently verified, and just if it makes sense. I mean, I can't quantify the gut factor, and that's subjective. What resonates with me may not resonate with you, but put it through some checks. I can think of a few interesting examples already of an eyewitness offering an incredible story, and then video showing important details that were underplayed or just left out. The truth is out there, but sometimes it takes extra work to uncover it. Another observation, and having already talked about being mindful of how a story is shaped, I'd also say be cognizant of who is being given the benefit of the doubt. I've read so many stories and heard a lot of talk, and it's from many perspectives. And one of the most frequently thing that keeps coming up is how a few bad apples can spoil the barrel. We're talking about how a handful of people can make a group look much worse than it actually is, or how it's being painted. I would ask, are you applying it to both sides? Are only a handful of provocateurs or looters giving protesters a bad name? Are only a handful of officers corrupt and racist, stating the reputation of law enforcement? Not everybody has received the same amount of grace in their characterization and their portrayal. And if you've personally decided that not everybody deserves the same consideration, ask yourself why you've come to that conclusion. You may have a very good reason, but just stop to check yourself. Last, I want to offer the observation that you can support something and still be critical of it. I can be a booster of a cause, a person, an organization, and still be honest about it or their flaws and missteps. I've cast my vote for a lot of people who later did me something to raise my voice. Only rarely did I ever decide to withdraw my support. More often, I spoke out because of my love of something, because my investment in something meant I wanted it to be better. I wanted it to be the best possible thing it could. If necessary, I want to fix mistakes, to make better decisions, and avoid future trouble. I think that kind of caring feedback can be the most influential. It's easy to understand why a lot of people aren't as receptive to outside input. But if the tough love is coming from a friend, a trusted voice, I hope you're more receptive to it. There are problems with the current system. We wouldn't be in this situation if there weren't. And there's not a single solution that will fix everything. But to end, I wish to offer a thought experiment. Sometime today, don't wait until tomorrow. Sometime today, take time to think about different viewpoints or perspectives. 1. Think about the people who watched the arrest of George Floyd. Think about their increasing concern and fear as force continued to be applied to a restrained man. Next. Think about officers just deployed to the streets today. First, consider those who are policing their home neighborhoods. They've been on the beat for years, and right now they know they're viewed with extra distrust, fear, and anger. Also think of the National Guard members who are deployed to serve. Might be in areas they've never been, or areas that they've been to before, but never in these circumstances. And now they're caught up in something that they weren't directly a part of starting, but it's right there in front of them now. Think of the people directing the response of the government and law enforcement, of the choices they have to make right now, the things they have to weigh. When they decide to take, or if they decide to take responsibility for actions, or when or if they choose to point fingers. Think about a mindset of a person who is deploying tear gas. Think about the mindset of somebody who chooses to throw bricks. In either one of these cases, what led them to that point? If you found yourself with the opportunity, what would you do in that circumstance? Think of the people who are tired of being ignored. The ones that know that they're going to be treated with violence, potential mockery, disdain, hate, for protesting night after night. Maybe even tonight. Think about how it must feel to be treated the way that we're seeing them treated, at a time when we've recently seen protesters be fully armed and storm state legislatures and not even face a citation. For these individuals, think about the sorrow, the passion, and or hope that it takes to motivate them to still raise their voice and what they to speak out on what they believe is important. Just two more. I invite you to put yourself in the shoes of Officer Derek Chauvin, the man who is now facing manslaughter and third-degree murder charges. And last, put yourself in the position of George Floyd, the man who can no longer tell us what he was feeling or thinking. Video tells us a little bit about how he was repeatedly saying he couldn't breathe. If you join me with this, some of these perspectives are going to make you uncomfortable, I think, if you're honest. Could be wrong. I often am. I don't know all the answers to anything. Certainly not ongoing race relations in America, economic disparity, how you balance the First Amendment, law and order, justice. I wish I could. I don't think people would listen if I could, but I can't. But I do think that a step toward a better tomorrow is spending more time thinking about others, especially those with different experiences and expectations. One other line that I scribbled down in my notes today is that the new normal many people would like to return to no longer exists. I would add the corollary that in some cases it never existed. There's never been a perfect part in human history. There's never been a point when at every single level everybody had it, everybody was happy, everybody was thrilled. I'd like to think if there would have been that point in history, we would have fought harder to hold on to it. As part of that, that means that we still have a chance to build to that, to do better, to admit when we've made mistakes, and to commit ourselves to a better path forward no matter what came before. Like I said, if you haven't already, take some time to think about the perspectives of other people, especially Mr. Floyd. I think if we would have stopped to think about that a little bit earlier, if we would have stopped to think about this at other junctions in our history, even recent history, where We did not live up to the ideals and to the expectations that we have for individuals and those in power, and how and the way the public react, that it wouldn't have gotten to this point. But this is where we are at. And it's like Ferguson, this is going to burn for a while. But from the ashes, I would like to hope that we can do better. That last one's not an observation, that's just a hope. I'm Caleb Smith with the Rocket Miner newspaper, wishing you a good day and a safe and better tomorrow.